economy, because we've looked at a couple of things that is affected in his few days in office. And first of that is the fate of SGR. Now you see, we've already seen the port, the dry port, move from Naivasha back to Mombasa, and the conversations of why it was actually put to be at Naivasha. Because SGR, number one, was not a money-making entity, and we had to find ways, whether we like it or not, to make it make money. So what is the fate of SGR? Joining me to look into this and many other issues for the next couple minutes, we're joined by George Munga, who is the managing partner at AMG Capital and a renowned economic analyst. George, how are you doing, sir?
Thank you, Elijah.
Let's begin with the first one. Moving the dry port from Naivasha back to Mombasa. George, is it popularist economics? Because we do know why it was taken to Naivasha.
I think, Elijah, you must understand why the previous regime decided to take, the dry port from Mombasa to Naivasha.
Yes.
The main reason was to create a business for SGR, because as it were, SGR, the way it was formulated, it was supposed to be a self-financing project, because such a project of that magnitude, if you decide to pay that loan from taxpayers from the exchequer, then it becomes very heavy. So I think the thought around that project was that it was supposed to be self-financing. That is why the Kenyatta's government decided to move the dry port from Mombasa to Naivasha so that it could facilitate the logistics between Mombasa and Nairobi, and then, of course, to Naivasha. Within that logistics, of course, SGR would earn revenues, and of course they have done so.
Yes.
I think the last financial year they made around 14 billion from cargo, and a paltry maybe 2 billion from passenger train. Moving the dry port back to Mombasa is, I would want to say, it's populist. And sometimes politicians would want to look at populist policies. You give them, that's how they earn their living. The risk that it portends to the economy is one, that SGR will lose business, and therefore those loan repayment will essentially go back to Treasury. So Treasury will have to plug in the deficit, because I'm sure that SGR will not be able to earn the 14 billion that it was earning from cargo. How do you bridge that gap? Because that is part of the revenues that was supposed to finance that loan. That was how the contract was worded. If you do that, then you have to look at the contract. Of course, for bilateral lenders, in most cases they don't lose. They're always on the winning side.
Yes.
So whichever way you look at it, the financiers of SGR will have to recoup their money either way. So if they don't recoup it from the private sector via the logistics business, then the government must have to go back to the exchequer and foot that bill. So in my opinion, I think it is something that probably the government would have given time just to look at how to bridge that gap. Coming on the backdrop of our very heavy loan repayment, you wonder how the new government would want to flow with that, or to bridge that gap. But let us wait and see how they maneuver.
Yes.
I believe there are technocrats who have come in, Njuguna Ndung'u being one of them, that would want to advise government on how best to go around that.
Yes. Let me take you back to July this year, when majority of those loans were due, and you did see that our forex reserves took a heavy hit when China came in calling for us to start repaying our SGR loans. So, George, when you look at it, with other people saying that, look, you have to look for ways to make it competitive so that you're not essentially forcing people to use SGR, but SGR is going to stand out as the best viable option. But then if you look at the monies that we made out of it, George, let's go back to what we made in Q2 of this year. We did make 3.65 billion out of SGR. 84% of that money, 3.08 billion, was out of cargo business for SGR. In each year, we need 12 billion to run SGR. So again, we have to borrow money for us to get the monies to pay back our loans. If you're going to factor in then the year-on-year repayments, is it a wrong move? Are we afraid of saying maybe the first thing you would have done is to say, let's work for a way before we take it back to Mombasa?
I think, Elijah, SGR, the initial formulators of that project,
yes,
had envisioned a situation where we had the line running all the way from Mombasa to Malaba, and then Uganda would pick it up to their border with Rwanda, and then it goes all the way to Kigali. If it was done that way, then it would have made a lot of sense because then all the interland countries
yes,
would have to use the SGR, and therefore it will be able to repay itself. But it terminating in Nairobi and Naivasha doesn't make a lot of economic sense. I can tell you for sure that the way the contracts are worded, or the contracts formulated, if nothing is done, and with dry port being taken back to Mombasa, then SGR might become a white elephant in the not so distant future. And as I told you, China, as our bilateral lender, always they ensure that their contracts are so tight that they don't lose. If they don't make money from their day-to-day operations, then the government must foot that bill and must pay those loans. So the way they do it is they either take a contract that favors them, yes, and that ensures that their loans are repaid, or they have collateral to that. You remember this contract between us and China has been let me use not a very good because it has been politicized, has been very opaque, yes, so to speak. Yes. But when you pick tidbits of what we've learned, or what we've been getting from government, is that SGR was secured through one logistics business, and of course our port, the Mombasa port, so that any cargo coming from the port was supposed to be handled by SGR. If that is now reversed, then the exchequer must take a beating, and they have to repay those deficits that SGR will those revenues that SGR will lose. Yes. So to me, I think maybe the government would have given it maybe 1 or 2 years to see how it pans out before they implement this. But that notwithstanding, they have done that. Let us just see how now it pans out in the next financial year. Yes,
pretty much. Just as we clear on this, George, and moving to the next one, when you look at the plans that the outgoing government had, in fact, they had plans for Naivasha industrial zones. Have they been all of a sudden then look at the value out of them is being taken out? For anybody looking to go into Naivasha right now, to that industrial zones, what is the need? Even if there isn't going to be business around there. Have we killed that project, essentially?
I think, Elijah, politicians are very fancy. They tend to have very fancy policies when you read them on paper.
Yes.
And when you read what the policies say on paper, you think of utopia, or what they will call Inchiliangani.
Or Canaan, if you remember.
Yes, yes. But when reality strikes sometimes, yes, it is very different. The essence of moving dry port moving the dry port from Mombasa to Naivasha was to decongest Mombasa, which was a good thing. But again, on the flip side, it killed business in Mombasa, apparently. If you've gone to Mombasa lately, Mombasa is a ghost town, if so to speak, because the CFS went, the logistics business between Mombasa, Nairobi, Malaba, all the way, of course, went with very few trucks are now plying that route. So moving the port back to Mombasa has the positive and the negative side. I don't know if the CFS will come back. I don't know if they'll allow the trucks now to start moving cargo, and I don't know how they're going to manage now congestion back, yes, because our interland countries were complaining about congestion. Remember, there's a time that Uganda went to Dar es Salaam. Mm-hmm. Burundi has been using Dar es Salaam.
Yes.
And even Rwanda, there's a time that they decided to go to Dar es Salaam. And of course, South Sudan wanted to use Djibouti. So with congestion again at the port, how are you going to convince these countries to still be using Mombasa. And of course, we had wanted to do Lamu. How do you convince these countries that we are so efficient that you should use us instead of Dar es Salaam and Djibouti? I think some of these policies needs a lot of thought process before they are implemented. But politicians, as they are, they want to move with very populist policies to be seen to be delivering on their promise. But at the end of the day, it comes biting. It doesn't bite the politician. It bites the mwananchi, who is the taxpayer at the end of the day. So I can foresee a situation where government will be forced to go back to the consolidated fund to be able to pay the SGR loan, because if their business doesn't make money,
yes,
then the fallback position is government, because government guaranteed that loan.
Pretty much. All right, let's move on to the next one. In as much as the state of the economy is concerned, if you've been following headlines across the globe, all central banks are increasing their interest rates. Save for what has happened this week in the UK, where they've taken a conservative position where they're cutting them down. And the IMF is not particularly happy with the condition that Liz's government is taking. She's quite new in that position. We were going to see exactly what happens. But save for them, every other person is talking about inflation. And to counter the Russia-Ukraine crisis, all the rates are up. Even currently, by the way, they've been adjusted upwards. If you remember, the Central Bank of Kenya did raise it by 7.5 again. So meaning they are on the upward trend. But then on the bonds market, that's where majority of local lenders, we're talking about the schemes and the practice that lend them to the government in terms of buying into their long-term and short-term bonds, are questioning the Central Bank of Kenya. Because if you look at the headlines, you will see that Kenya has been priced out of international bonds because of interest rates. So the only way they have to look is currently where they can actually get to control those local interest rates. But looks as if the schemes that lend to the Treasury and the Central Bank are not happy. They want all those bonds to reflect rates of above 14%. But if you look at those 15-year and 10-year bonds, all of them are below 14%. They're clocking around 13.5 to 13.9%. Now, George, you see the government, if you look at exactly what's going on in the international market, they've run away from Euro bonds, because then the interest rates are quite high. So they come to the local market and then say, because we have the right to control the lending rates here, let's float as many as we can with these interest rates that we can actually get to pay. But then when you look at the international market, everybody is way up. Are they sort of, for using an economic term then, are they devaluing local assets by doing that?
They are definitely, but this is a global phenomenon. You remember when you look at the Fed, I think that is early last week,
yes,
the governor there was under a lot of pressure to increase rates because, one, to stem inflation in the US. The same has happened in the UK, where the central bank mandarins were forced to increase rates to stem inflation,
yes,
in that country. I don't know how Liz will deal with it now that he's come into office. We've not heard much about China because it's quite a closed economy. But world over, there's been a lot of pressure to increase interest rates because of the inflationary pressure that were pressured by the Russian-Ukraine crisis, and of course the oil crisis that we've had for quite some time now. When that happens, Elijah, the local market takes a beating immediately, because then there's capital local market to those markets that offer better interest rates. And of course, you know, Kenya is an emerging economy, and therefore it's not as lucrative as the other developed economies. So for us to attract investments, or for us to attract those funds, then our rates must be slightly above the market, maybe by 0.5 or 0.1 basis points. That puts the government in a very awkward position, because then again, they don't want to increase rates locally. But if they don't do that, then they cannot attract those funds, which again now pushes them back to borrow locally. So our policymakers locally are quite hard pressed. They'll have to go either way. to attract these funds.
Yes.
But in my forecast, I see our bonds going above 14%, maybe 14.25 or 14.5%. Same to our treasury bills. If we are to maintain the funds that we really have local and even to attract more FDIs into the country. As I mentioned earlier, remember we have depleted our forex reserves. And we cannot sustain our imports maybe in the next 1 year. So we must do that. The negative side of that is that if we do that, then we'll devalue the Kenya shilling. Meaning Kenya shilling might trade at maybe above 120, and when we do that, then our imports becomes expensive.
Yes.
But either way, we have to flow with that. So the central bank governor, with the CS Treasury, who is incoming, that is Jiguna Dungu, they have the work cut out. They must think through some of these policy issues very clearly if they are not to further increase the cost of living in the country, because when our currency is devalued, then it affects our cost of importation, and when the cost of importation is high,
yes,
then it affects the cost of living, because most of our day-to-day products are imported, including energy, that is fuel.
Yes. I was looking at some analysis yesterday around this particular area, but they say, George, like, you got to do it now. You float it, see what you can get. Then after that, you can actually get to float another one as well, because then you've missed on these other ones that you've been floating at that 13.8, 13.9%. That it's a game now. Is that what they're doing at Treasury, where they're saying just float it with those rates? Those who can buy in, inshallah. Those who can't, then later on would review by what level we've missed that bond buy, and then we'll float it with a different rate as well.
That would be a test run, and sometimes it is good to do a test run just to see the reaction of the market towards towards what you do in the market. So even me, if I was in the position of Njoroge or Ndungu, I would do that. I would do a test run just to see the impact that it creates in the market, and if it doesn't fly, then I come back again with a better rate. The only challenge is if it doesn't fly, then you're forced now to increase your rates by a very huge margin. If you're doing maybe 13.5, then you might be forced to do 14 or 14.5% to attract those who did not pick that tranche. So I support they would want to go in with a test run, just see how the market responds. I have not heard the bankers talk about the response to this, but I believe in the next 1 or 2 weeks you'll hear the bankers talk about the rates in the market. And when the bankers talk, of course, they force the government, because they are lenders to the government. I've seen government wanting to borrow at least is it 650 billion locally, and that is quite huge. And who do they go to? They go to the local commercial banks, and therefore the commercial banks have a big say on what rate they would want the government to pay them in the prevailing circumstances. Sometimes they don't say no expressly, but they say no via how they respond to those auctions. If they don't like the rate, then they just don't respond to the auctions that the central bank gives them.
Pretty much. All right, let's run into the last one. Now, what's happening at the Norfolk Hotel in the next 10 minutes? We're going to see a brief by NCBA, Safaricom, and KCB. They spoke about total financial inclusion in the country. Let's touch another area that came up during the Members of Parliament induction. Others said it's time for us to think about separating Safaricom from M-Pesa. By the way, if you Google that headline, you'll go all the way back to around 2016 when we started talking about separating Safaricom from M-Pesa, but that has never seen the light of the day. George, quickly on this particular one, is there a need for us to talk about separating Safaricom from M-Pesa? Because critics to this say, I mean, it's working fine. Why would you touch it?
I would not go with separation, because that means you'll be punishing a company for its success we have a very large conglomerates that have operated as they are. Of course, they have been pushed to separate business models across the world. Remember, we had Facebook the other day when they wanted them to separate their business. But in our local context, I don't think Safaricom has gone that big that it poses any risks to the economy. Because even if they were to be pushed to separate, then it will be done on paper, but not practically. Because what they will do is just to form a holding company that holds the telco side of that business, and of course the finance side of that business, and then the entire model will be controlled by a holding company up there. So basically they'll separate in paper, but in practice they'll not. So I don't think it is a good idea to do that. And I'm never very comfortable, Elijah, when government meddles into private sector. It smells. Sometimes it smells something, because there's something they want to achieve.
Yes.
You don't want to go that direction. In fact, what has been working in the previous 2-3 years has been for companies to come together. Remember mergers in the banking sector, where NCBA merged with Commercial Bank of Africa to form NCBA. That was NIC and Commercial Bank of Africa. So mergers are better encouraged than separation, so that they can go out there and compete as huge conglomerate companies. Remember, Safaricom has been wanting to go out of the country. How do they go there if they don't have the financial muscle to do that? So I would not support any idea of separation for now. I don't think Safaricom presents any serious risk to the economy with the way the business model, model is. And when we see politicians pushing something, then there's something that they want to achieve that sometimes, in most cases, is selfish.
Pretty much. George, thank you very much for coming by. Always lovely to have you around.
Thank you,
fantastic. So here from George, it's not grown that big to the point that we'll talk about separating Safaricom from M-Pesa. And by the way, if you did listen to the CEO, Peter Ndegwa, did say exactly what George said. If you're pushing for that, then we'll just create a holding company, which is essentially, again, Safaricom in its sense. You have not really done so much to separate those two business entities. Hopefully, after that presser today, we're going to see something from Safaricom CEO Peter Ndegwa, in as much as that is concerned, because Ruto's government is taking shape and they'll be pushing for that as well. Taking back to the time that he did join us here on our Lookuptv business at Lookuptv across all your social media platforms. I am at Kiage SIMBA. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode. We'll be talking about food waste management. If you didn't know, tomorrow is our day internationally. So let's talk about it here locally as we are fighting drought and the effects of drought. See you then.
Yippee! Kamata plotting at 349K. Oh yes, for only 349,000 Kenyan shillings, you become a plot owner at the Great Oasis Gardens, Nanyuki.